And I'm appreciative of his lucid writing, of his clear statements, and also his sense of humor. And I will immediately share a joke I like very much. Maybe I will redo it. I don't remember it exactly, but it was when he was addressing the issue of parties and referendums. He noted somewhere that parties like the idea of referendum as much as Turkeys like the idea of Christmas. So his new book, Matt Qvortrup's new book, is called Democracy on Demand. And I like this idea very much about the demand-driven democracy because it implies that we need to have mechanisms and forms, deliberative, direct decision-making or whatever, to address diverse needs of our democracies, and not just the party-centric thing, the mediation of parties that is imposed on us as the only way of addressing problems. So I guess in his findings, he will illuminate us also on not only on direct decision-making, initiative and referendum, but also on forums like the Citizens' Assembly, citizen juries, citizen budget, and how they can be fit for different citizens' needs of different social groups and political minorities, and why not majorities. For example, in my country, I think that we do not have problem of expressing political minorities, but more we have a case of an endangered majority that has no say in policy making. I give you Professor Matt Qvortrup. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Daniela. That's you made me blush now. So I'm quite sort of. You made me also feel that I have to live up to something. But then anyway, that's good with a little bit of pressure there. Now I should say by way of introduction that in a way I am just a political scientist. I'm not like you, for instance, Daniela, and the other Daniela I can see on the screen, and many other people. I'm not out there actually doing things. And in writing the book, Democracy on Demand, I drew on a lot of people. I interviewed a lot of people. Bruno Kaufmann, who was the narrator of that wonderful video I just saw, it's one of the people I spoke to. And I think when I go through the list of the people I thank in the book, that's basically all the people I can see there on my screen up there. So in a way, I am just the narrator of your story. But somebody has to tell the story, and other people, of course, have told the story in other ways as well. I think if we can just sort of go back to the democracy on demand issue. Now, nowadays we have a lot of this sort of stuff on demand. We have print on demand. I think some old books, if they're no longer in the bookshop, you can get them print on demand. So we can sort of, as consumers, take the initiative. We can say, well, we want to empower ourselves. And today, very sort of basically speaking, we live in the age of Netflix or the age of Spotify or whatever. When I grew up in, which is a slightly too long time ago, I remember the 1980s. Some of you may not remember that. And back in those days, if you wanted to see a film, you'd have to go to the movie theater, and they would tell you which film you had to watch. And there would be 5 or 6, or you had to watch television, and there would be a number of films on, and some people would have decided for you. Even if you were buying music, then you had to listen to the 12 tracks that the record company had selected. Nowadays, I can choose that I want to listen to AC/DC as well as Mozart, as well as Tupac on one single playlist. You might say that says something about my musical taste. We won't go into that. And it is odd, by the way. But you're allowed to be odd. Daniela mentioned that I was a referendum nerd. Well, I might be a nerd in many other ways. We're all allowed to be our own little nerds. Now, the problem with democracy is that democracy is still stuck in the same groove as the LPs of the 80s and the CDs and the movie theaters. You get one list you can vote for. You can vote for one party, or you can vote for another party, and that's it. And in a concept that I'm developing currently with Daniela, the other Daniela, who's also on the screen, we're talking about complementary democracy. And really, democracy on demand is also part of the complementary idea of democracy. Now, representative democracy is a wonderful thing. It is just not the only show in town. We need to have elected representatives. And Daniela, you've just been you've just been elected as representatives. You're an enthusiast for direct democracy, but you're also an elected representative. And we need to have both. But we need to upgrade democracy from this sort of 1.1 to the 2.0 democracy. We need to have democracy for adults because we are, all of us, clever enough, informed enough to make actual decisions. And therefore, democracy on demand is ways in which, all the complementary ways in which we can also participate, not just every 4 years voting for a particular party that we probably only agree with on a few issues. You have an election, in those of you who are in Germany, in a few weeks' time, well, few months' time, actually. And some of you will say, well, I only agree with 60% of the parties at most. Is that enough? No, you need to have other ways into it. Now, that's sort of like democracy on demand is that idea of giving responsibility to people, in also allowing people to, if you like, as we say in Britain, have your cake and eat it. And there's no reason why you shouldn't have your cake and eat it. You should be allowed to choose. You should obviously be allowed to choose policies sort of in a bespoke sort of way. I mean, if you're allowed to choose something as unimportant as tracks on your playlist, or the movies you're going to watch on Netflix, or then why aren't you allowed to choose policies, especially at a time when we have so much information at our fingertips? When I voted in the first elections back in the day, and referendums back in the day, I had to go to the library to get information. Now I just type in a few things and I get all the information and I can make up my mind. Now, the other problem that we have in democracy at the moment, and this is a little bit more one of those things where people say, well, that is a problem, a referendum is not going to help, well, direct democracy is not going to help, is polarization. We have a lot of people who talk, very few people who listen. Whenever I'm in public meetings, I tend to get very angry, probably you do too, most of you. And sometimes I will say to people, are you listening to me? And when I say, are you listening to me? That means that I am certainly not listening to them, because we tend to have that. And we need to go back and more fundamentally look at this idea of democracy as discussion. I think Thomas Masaryk, who was the first president of Czechoslovakia, defined democracy as discussion and a way of life. And I would like to just go back to that particular argument and say a few things about this. And this is sort of like the more philosophical part of my conversation here tonight. And I am in my real life, I am a professor of political science. So you'll have to bear with me for being a little bit academic now. So if we have to look at what do we mean by politics and what do we mean by policy? There's a very sort of classic definition of politics, which says that politics is the sphere where you distinguish between friend and enemy. It doesn't mean that we're going to kill all our opponents. Sometimes you feel like that, but politics is very much this sort of like adversary kind of game. I am from this party or I'm from that party. And especially representative democracy is politics. So if politics is where we distinguish between friend and enemy, we might say, well, how do we overcome that? We overcome that by looking at, and this is where we have a distinction in English, which I'm not sure you have in other languages. In German, for example, it's Politik, and Politik can be both issues as well as can be sort of party politics. But in Britain and in America, and I guess in Australia and New Zealand as well, we have a distinction between politics, which is the battle, the friend and enemy kind of field, and then we have policy, which is, and policy can be defined as where you distinguish between feasible and not feasible, or possible or not possible, or implementable or not implementable. So policy is about practical issues. Is this actually possible? Is this actually going to solve the problem? Whereas politics is about the battle of different political armies, if you like. So representative democracy is fundamentally politics. That's the battle. Whereas direct democracy allows us to actually discuss issues. So when we're discussing issues, that can be whether it's a universal basic income, or it can be pesticides, or it can be house prices, then we're not looking at the issues of which camp are you in. We might occasionally do that, but the fundamental issue is that people actually talk about, is this actually going to be possible? If we introduce rent control, for example, in Berlin, I believe, if we introduce that, then the debate is it going to work or is it not going to work? So direct democracy is a thing that requires us to talk to each other and listen to each other. And this will move on to sort of another more, if you like, philosophical aspect of democracy. Now, if democracy is discussion, then the fundamental thing about discussion is that we listen to people. And when we listen to people, also means that we learn from other people. We should be open to learning from other people. When I'm teaching my students about what we call deliberative democracy, which is where sort of people try to talk about it, I always sort of give them a single task, and I try to ask them to do a single thing for a whole week. Every time you enter into a discussion with anybody, try to learn one thing. So if I were to enter into a discussion with Viktor Orban or Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump, I'm just using a couple of random examples here, then I should be open to learning at least one thing in my discussion from those people. Whether those people are then going to listen to me as well is perhaps an open question. I haven't had discussions with any of those individuals. Maybe that will change. But try to, as an experiment, have an openness in your discussion. Because if you have that openness in discussion, say, I can actually learn something, then we might be able to move the agenda in a different way. And having these different mechanisms, by the way, is what we have with what's known as participatory budgeting, where you give people responsibility to hand over those things. But I just come back to the idea of what we sometimes have called deliberative listening. That's not a thing in my book, but we're sort of moving on to a thing that we're developing at the moment. But the idea of democracy on demand is that you allow people to demand when they want to have a say on issues, not a say on in the battleground between political parties. It is issue-based politics. Things can be debated as policies rather than adversary politics. But if we can again go back to this idea of democracy as listening, then we can also say that it is fundamental in democracy that we learn from people. Throughout the ages, when we go back to the ancient Greeks or the philosophers in the Middle Ages, then they all say that democracy is there because even the most intelligent and clever people can benefit from the wisdom of the crowd. When Aristotle, great Macedonian, a Greek philosopher, depending on what side of the fence you're on down there, but when Aristotle wrote his great book on politics, he says democracy or constitutional government, as he called it, is preferable because even if the most intelligent people have a lot of answers, they don't have all the answers. Our friends from Taiwan will know a Chinese saying that is saying that 3 stupid shoemakers know more than the wisest man, because the 3 individual shoemakers collectively know more. And therefore, the more stupid shoemakers we have, the better. But all of this requires that whoever is in power, who has ever been elected as representative to represent us, has to listen to us. And we also, in turn, as being co-lawmakers, have to listen to other people and engage in that debate. You can say that democracy is listening, democracy is learning. And it has been also been said by a woman called Catherine Bateman, an anthropologist, who says, we are not what we know, but we are what we're willing to learn. And democracy is very much that we are what we're willing to learn. We're willing to listen to other people. We're willing to be corrected. We're willing to move forward. And that is the reason why democracy is vastly superior to any other system in the world, and why direct democracy is vastly superior to systems that only have representative democracy. I can see that when my time is sort of approaching to be up. Isn't that right? Caroline is nodding. Okay, well, I'm pretty much here. I've pretty much reached the end of the line. So democracy is discussion, democracy is listening, democracy is being open to other people's ideas. But whenever we then have these, and it also is focused fundamentally on depolarization, because we don't want to have these polarized debates between, the battles between different political parties. Actually want to solve problems. It's another thing that if we can in politics is not about winning the argument. Politics or policy is about solving the problems, and we can only solve the problems if we're allowed to contribute to solving the problem. Now, there might be sort of hard-headed empiricists out there, that's what I would call them if I was in a university setting, or just being skeptics or cynics who would say, well, that's all good with all your direct democracy and all of that, but does it actually work? Well, the fact of the matter, you can read more about it in my book, the fact of the matter is that democracy, and especially direct democracy, works. The richest, the most successful countries on all matters are democratic countries. But if we then look at the subset of countries that have elements of direct democracy, countries that have democracy on demand, if you like, then they tend to be even more successful. The most successful states in America are the countries in the West. They have the highest number of patents, the highest number of innovative ideas in the environment, like the places like Oregon, Washington State, and California. The overall best place to live in the world is Switzerland. Well, the Swiss give the people the responsibility to enact policies. But if we want to have sort of statistical facts, then in all the league tables, when they look at happiness, then happiness is correlated with the number of referendums that you have in that country. And also, if you are then getting really sort of focused on the GDP per capita and are you going to be richer or poorer, then there is a very simple statistic that I would like to cite for you, and I'd like to pretty much finish off with that one. And that is, for every referendum that is held, for every extra referendum held, the average citizen will be $1,000 better off. So if you have 10 more referendums, you are, statistically speaking, likely to gain an extra $10,000. Of course, it doesn't work as neatly as that, but overall, statistically speaking, you get richer the more you allow people to engage in democracy. And on my just sort of final note, I would like to quote a line from a long gone British politician called Keith Joseph. And Keith Joseph was a minister in the early 1980s, and he was asked why all this democracy. And he was, at the time when the Russians and the Soviets were in the ascendancy, and he said, well, democracy gives people responsibility. And if you don't have democracy, then you take responsibility away from people. So, and this is a quote, if you give people responsibility, they become responsible. And if you take responsibility away from people, they become irresponsible. And I think we should allow people democracy on demand so that they can become more responsible citizens. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Matt, for this very hopeful book, hopeful message, on how to take democracy forward. I'm thinking about a book because your book, Democracy on Demand, will be published next month. And you kindly arranged that participants from this event can purchase it at a discount. So I just want to point out that there's a link for that and a discount code in the chat that you can use. And now after this, this sort of philosophical, fundamental look at direct democracy around the world, we thought it would be really nice to bring in some specific regional pathways for a future of direct democracy. And so at Democracy International, we are very lucky to have a wonderful international board with people from all over the world who are really experts and who are very passionate about direct democracy. And so without further ado, I would like to start with the person who's the furthest away from us and for whom I think it is also the latest in the evening, Professor Young-Ok Lee from South Korea, who, as I said, is a member of our board. She is also an honorary professor of sociology at the Catholic University of Daegu, and was the Minister of Gender Equality and Family for the Republic of Korea. And Young-Ok, I would like to offer you the floor.
Thank you. It is great honor to have this wonderful opportunity to share my experience in this special occasion of 10th anniversary of Democracy International. I was already introduced. My name is Young-Ok Lee from Republic of Korea. Can you share my slide? Yeah. So, just because I should present myself in 3 minutes in 33 slides, just go through. Will you check? Just go. So yeah, I came from here. So I was in charge of organizing Seoul Global Forum in Modern Direct Democracy in 2008. So I have participated in all the continuing global forum except Daejeon. So let's go. So for last 10 years, I thought 10 years old Democracy International has provided a space of mutual and participatory learning. Finally, it has constructed a global partnership beyond the international mutual learning, I thought. So I will share my experience with the snapshot. Go, will you? Just go. Snapshot, starting with the study tour to Switzerland in 2008. Go. Let's go down. Yeah. It's in Switzerland again. Go down. Yeah, push. Let's go. in Hungary and finally in United States. So we can see the familiar faces also. In United States, it was really participatory learning process. So again, the mutual learning and go down. Yeah, go down. Yeah. So Global Forum has become global community of direct democracy, as I. So and then the gap between the decision making and the responsibilities and the burdens of those kind of decision making became very widened. So in Korea, go down. In various social movements in the Republic of Korea have been triggered against and for better decision making. Go down. Yeah. So you can see all those demands. And the challenges of democracy are based on the partisan differentiation of policy agenda, weak social basis of political party, weak infra of democracy value. Go. Yeah, pass. So how to build a democratic governance? So you can see pass. So we have discussed for last 10 years more deliberate and direct democracy. Next, yeah. And in Korean context, we have practiced the plebiscite and nowadays in democratic government deliberation. So those kinds were practiced. Pass. So there are various kinds of decision making. So for the very delicate nuclear reactor building issue, university entrance examination issue, which were very difficult to decide. So those were go to plebiscite. And also, finally, we have adopted the deliberation process also. Yes. Yeah, but we did the huge decision making were done by deliberation process, but it is related the problem of representation. So random sampling. Who did the random sampling? The most of the technocrat has been involved in this process, and only 471 citizens were selected, and those kind of selection process and also representation of those citizens were also related. Pass. Yeah. Okay. Pass, because time is so limited. You can pass down next. But so deliberate, go down. Pass, yeah. So for the, I think all those kind of, based on all those kind of process, we have public tools such as media and education, and the legal basis should be strengthened. Otherwise, all those kind of practices are still in a weak state, in decision-making process. Good. Yes. Global democracy has been institutionalized. I thought the Democracy International can play the significant role with the more governmental or intergovernmental organization UNDEF and the Community of Democracy process. Yeah. So, pass. I thought there remains new challenges which is related with equism, related with the sustainability and feminism and migration and the refugees, how to be more inclusive in those areas also. Yes. So especially for women's political representation is going to be very beneficial in deepening democratization, because it can go beyond the nationalism and the reinterpretation of value and tradition, and how to reorient in a civilian control of a consumption culture. So in that sense, this kind of women's political representation can deepen democratization process. Pass. And then we are faced with COVID-19. I thought through these challenges, economy and the public service and social regulation should be combined with the deepening democracy. So we were all awakened through this kind of painful experiences. Down. And COVID-19 and the human security first policy could have political consensus in this polarized partisan politics. So I think we have some kind of opportunity in this tragic situation. So common security politics of cooperation are based on information sharing, awareness of necessity of mutual cooperation, and the participatory construction of a security check and social distanciation. Finally, so I was in Berlin with my students, with Dr. Mampod and those have helped my students. Those next generation will take a continuing journey of directed democracy by crossing the border. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Young Ok, for sharing that with us. And we will have time for some questions from the audience afterwards. If you have any questions, you can also post them in the chat, and then we will hope to get to them. Of course, we also want to keep an eye on the clock at the same time. So I would now like to go to the colleague who is closest to Cologne of the 3 board members we've asked to speak. That is Mehdi Ben Mimoun. Mehdi Ben Mimoun is a professor at the Institut National Agronomique de Tunisia, University of Carthage. And he has been a long-term democracy activist, and he, among other things, has helped us organize the 2015 Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, which took place in Tunisia. And Mehdi, I would like to ask you to share a little bit the perspective from Tunisia and from Africa with us, and to give us a hopeful vision for the future.
Thank you, Caroline. I need to share my screen, so if you do it or give me the authorization for that.
You should be able to do it. I think it's better if you do it, because there seems to be a little bit of a delay when I do it.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to present you about vision from Tunisia. The first thing is that need to pass to the second one. Okay. I hope that Tunisia will not be the exception in the region, and we will have more democracy in the war region, and we will not be in some years the only blue country in our region. I hope we will have a strong in Tunisia with all the constitutional court, but we are still waiting for it since now 7 years. For that, we need to consolidate the democratic choice with greater citizen involvement at the local level. It could be done with more with Tunisian for implementation of program for living environment. We need to have a better quality of public leaders. I think the best way for that is to work with young people from all regions with a high sense of serving their community. And about referendum in Tunisia, in our constitution, there is a limit choice for referendum. It's the president referendum in circumstances. So, and it's about ratification of treaties, freedom and human rights, or personal status. So it's really limited subject where to have a referendum. However, if we go to the local government law, there is much more possibility to have a referendum at local level. So 10% of local electors can also initiate a referendum, or the 2/3 majority of the council members. So I hope in the next years, we will have the first referendum, perhaps at a local region, and let's dreams come true. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehdi. I believe we can stop screen sharing. Yes. Thank you very much for that quick insight into the situation in Tunisia, and we will talk about it a little bit more afterwards in our panel conversation. But finally, I would like to offer the floor to our third board member, who is Joe Matthews. He's a journalist from California. From the United States. He works for Zocalo Public Square. They're based in Los Angeles, and they do a really great brand of journalism, which tries to go beyond the news and really does in-depth human stories. And I hope that Joe can give us a little bit of a hopeful view from California. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome. this is a holiday weekend here in the United States, the Independence Day, the 4th of July tomorrow. And, you know, at this time of year, we hear this old story of the United States as being formed from this great democratic revolution where we cast off our British rulers and formed a great new constitutional republic. But that story is hard to hear and doesn't really cover the half of the country that I live in, the West, where the story, you know, here in particularly American Southwest is how in the late 1840s, we were conquered into the United States in a very illegal and imperialistic war that the United States conducted against Mexico. So in that context, I find myself thinking and being asked to offer specific ideas, specific dream for democracy and direct democracy. I find myself thinking of the constant conversation, disinformation, misinformation, and conflict, politics, and human costs of our obsession in this country with the United States-Mexico border. Populist governments in the United States and also now in Mexico have tried to impose all sorts of things on the border region, both policies about migration and how migration is handled that have deep costs for the border region, the people who live on the border and are trying to cross the border, people on both sides of the US-Mexico border. It has become a dominant subject in United States politics, and is somewhat and a significant one in Mexican politics. There's also an enormous difference between a huge chasm, a Grand Canyon size gap between the lived reality of actually being at the border and the media and sort of political narratives around the border. And the political media narratives, the border is this great source of problems and conflict. To actually be at the border, you see communities that and people who move across the border as part of their lives, their work, their education, and their everyday lives. But the people who actually live and work in the border region are not really part of the conversation. The decisions are made by people who know very little about the region in Washington, D.C. and Mexico City. This strikes me as an enormous opportunity for transnational democracy to take root. Why don't we at Democracy International or somebody could come together and sort of map the border region? We could talk about the 6 Mexican states or the 4 US states that are on the border region. We could declare that the border region, or simply say the border region is everything within 100 kilometers of the border. And then we could convene a citizens' assembly with the goal of the people who live and work in the border region actually gathering and trying to decide for themselves how it would be better to govern the border with actually in the basis of realities rather than political and media narratives. They might create a structure for border governance. Perhaps that border governance structure could include, my dream, elements and tools of direct democracy to allow people on both sides of the border to propose ideas, to propose policies, to govern that border region. Seems like an enormous opportunity and fully justified again by the failures. We've seen just in recent years, everything from concentration camps put together by the United States government on the American side of the border to some abusive Mexican policies that allow migrants, that keep migrants on the Mexican side of the border and put them in living conditions that are unhealthy and profoundly dangerous. It's time for the border region as a place that has been lied about and neglected to rise up and to govern itself democratically. And that's my idea for this moment. I want to say this, I should close by saying, as the co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy, I hope this is the kind of idea we'll hear about in Mexico City in 2023 when we bring the Global Forum there. And we will gather, actually expect to gather very near the Zocalo, from which my organization Here LA takes its name, which is the central square of Mexico City and of the country of Mexico, where all kinds of different institutions come together and people come together for all kinds of different reasons. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks to Democracy International, and happy birthday, Feliz cumpleaños.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, and so before moving on to the second part of our event, which will be a little more interactive and where we would like to give you all the chance to talk to each other more detailed, we want to have a quick Q&A with our four speakers who we've heard from now. If you have any questions for them, feel free to post them in the chat. Otherwise, I have some questions. I would like to start off specifically with a question to Young Ok and Mehdi. You have mentioned the generational shift that is coming. You've mentioned the change of mentality that is coming with young people. I know also, Young Ok, that you have talked about that in previous meetings we've had, specifically in the context of the presidential elections that are upcoming in South Korea. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the opportunity that presents itself with young people coming into politics and the opportunity that has specifically for direct democracy. So I don't know who of you would like to answer that first. Feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah. I believe Young Ok is trying to.
Sorry. It is very complicated because as our keynote speaker has already pointed out, most of the younger generation, they are more oriented into policy issue, which is closely related with the more direct democracy rather than politics. But those kind of their political will were not adequately integrated into existing systems, so they are usually absorbed by existing partisan politics. So, so because of them, the existing party political leaders or party members thought the young people are very mobile and flexible and the swing voters. So they want to be very sensitive for those kind of swing voters. That is one reaction. The other is they want to make them more representative through some kind of biological representation. So they invited more younger parliament candidate, more younger decision. They provide a position to the biologically younger people, but usually those young people, they don't want to be represented by their even peer groups. They are more sensitive in their own the policy agenda. So some kind of communication gap between existing political groups and the younger generation, I think it is a kind of misunderstanding. Sometimes make existing politics became more complex. So I thought the role of direct democracy has become more important in this specific situation. That was my understanding.
Yes, please, Mehdi, go ahead.
So by law, for the different lists for the elections, there is a % of young people that must be in the list. So there is some young people in parliament and in local municipality. However, the participation of the young people in decision making is very very low, and their participation to the election is also very low. So we need to bring them to the public sphere, and I think one of the way for that is to work on policy and in local at the local national level, and that's why I'm dreaming to work with young people in the region and to leader there and to bring a new generation of people for Tunisia.
Thank you very much. In the meantime, people are posing questions in the chat, and I will just pass one along to Professor Fortrup. You've mentioned that every referendum makes us $1,000 richer. The question is, does that apply for all political levels? So somebody is trying to figure out how much money we are going to make.
Yes, well, it's a national level referendums, but if you look at the places where you have referendums on local level, that also works. But my calculation, just before you renegotiate your bank loan or whatever, is based on national government, national referendums. But one can see the same tendency in traditionally in places in Germany where they have Volksbegehren and Volksabstimmungen. Now, of course, all the Länder in Germany have that, so it's impossible to compare. But historically speaking, the more successful ones of the German Länder, for example, have also been the ones where there were elements of, well, rather imperfect direct democracy, but certainly had an effect there. So it's overall, it's the national referendums, but it is a case of we have to have all of the above. Democracy is a we have complementary democracy. We shouldn't just have referendums and initiatives. We should also have, as Joe was suggesting before, citizens' assemblies where representative people come together and say what they think is the problem and what they think is the solution to the problems. So we have to have all of the above. That let 1,000 different types of democracies bloom, I think would be the slogan we should have. We should have citizens juries, we should have participatory budgeting, referendums, and even the recall possibly. More accountability makes politics better and people ultimately richer.
Thank you very much for that. There's also a question for Joe in the chat. That question is, would it be an idea to pilot start a proposed democratic border polity at the local level between Tijuana and San Diego? I have a national level question follow-up, or not exactly follow-up, but Professor Fortrup has mentioned that that direct democracy is a way out of polarization, that it is important to keep discussion lines open, and especially in a country that has a lot of polarization because of two different political parties that are, it's basically in essence a two-party system, even if it's not legally a two-party system. Would a national referendum be a solution for polarization of politics in the US? Please go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I'll take the first one first about the about you could pilot sort of Tijuana and San Diego. Essentially, that's already happened in Tijuana and San Diego. The local governments on both sides of the border have a long history of cooperation. In parks, they're right next to each other, and Tijuana's had a lot of progressive leaders, not so much the most recent mayor, but who are from San Diego, were educated there, grew up there. So it's been a pretty porous border. There were even attempts to, jointly bid for the Pan American Games, or even talked about the Olympic Games jointly cross-border. There's an airport. When a new airport was built on the Tijuana side, it was built right on the border in a way that with a terminal and an entrance on the San Diego side. I mean, there is a hunger for that kind of cooperation within the border region itself, but it is blocked by federal policy. And so that's why I think people in the border region need to, and I use this phrase advisedly in a wildly different context, and Europeans are used to hearing it, take control. of their own region on both sides, because they are one region and people have that understanding in a way that people far from the border don't. So yes, I mean, and then you see similar things in, El Paso and Juarez. So it's that, I mean, that the border region would do a better job of governing itself than Mexico City or Washington, D.C. have. To the question of national referendum, I think there are a lot of great reasons for national referendum to hear voices, to try to get. I think Daniela, used the phrase as sort of the frustrated majority, or the kind of entrapped majority in her country. There are a lot of issues in which there's strong majority support for change in the United States that are frustrated by the American system. I think the referendum brings that in. I don't know if that will be depolarizing. I'm not sure I can say that. I would say that when we talk about polarization and direct democracy in the United States right now, I actually am deeply concerned that polarization is undermining direct democracy structures. We're seeing a strong trend in recent years as states, since we have direct democracy at the local level and all in 49 of 50 states, and at the state level in half of them, what you're seeing is that as one part or the other gains total control in a state, they limit direct democracy using the legislation, the courts. It's of a piece you may, if you read American media, you talk a lot about new legislation from Republicans in different states limiting voting, but getting less attention are efforts to limit the use of direct democracy. I mean, dramatically in Florida, the Dakotas, Mississippi, essentially a partisan court ruling effectively ended their direct democracy. It's still on the books, but it's now unusable. So I do know that polarization can hurt direct democracy. Can direct democracy overcome polarization? That I'm less certain of, but I mean, there are lots of great reasons for national referendum, and I would recommend for anyone who hasn't read it, my friend and Los Angeles neighbor, John Matsusaka's book, John being the head of the Initiative Referendum Institute of the US, Let the People Rule, which explains many reasons why, there would sort of be a little bit of oxygen into the peculiar American system if we had national referendum, even just advisory or agenda setting referendum or initiatives, as we see with the ECI.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Then with an eye firmly on the clock, because we do have to move to the second part of our event, I have one closing question, and I would ask that I would like to pose to all of you, and I would ask you to answer in like 1-2 sentences, just to be brief. You have all hosted a global forum on modern direct democracy. Joe, you are the co-president of the Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. And Matt, you've been to Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. So in your view, were there any lasting effects of it? What is the value of organizing meetings like this? How has it influenced your work? And yeah, how has it changed things for democracy activism in your country? Matt, you can go first. Please go ahead.
Yes, I think it is a case of Democrats or direct Democrats in all countries unite. I think that the fact that we have this meeting now, the fact we had the meeting in Taiwan, and we've had meetings before, means we all get together, we get to learn from each other, we get to compare notes, and we get to also, in the spirit of listening, listen to each other's mistakes. So the fact that we are actually all together from different countries, from different continents, means that we can also all march forward together. So Forza Democrazia, let's move forward, let's conquer the world together.
I'll answer. Our forum in 2010, it was very hard to host these things, because Bruno has always very big ideas and that are hard to execute. But I have heard repeatedly the forum in 2010 in San Francisco cited as the place which really kicked off a reform effort, modest reform effort of the California process that brought a little more deliberation into the process, including the ability for people to agree to take measures off the ballot once they qualified. We didn't have that before. Also, signature petition circulators as part of that reform effort, which finally was enacted in 2014. Petition circulators got more than a month. Certainly the process is credited by our friends at Oregon and Healthy Democracy for the spread of that citizens jury idea to other states in the US. I'm also sort of struck by the change in mindset amongst a lot of people in direct democracy in the United States who've heard of the forum and the conversations out. I remember in 2010, the Americans we were partnering with, including my good friend Paul Jacob, who may be on this call, were so skeptical of the relevance of examples from outside the United States that they insisted on. It was two forums. We had one that was a couple of days of international, and then we had 3 days of all about the US. They were separate. They were segregated forums. I'm not sure why I agreed to that, but I did. And, ultimately, a lot of those folks changed and started to look more seriously at Switzerland and other places around the world, and Taiwan. And they're now, newly minted democratic internationalists. And I take great pleasure of reminding them how close-minded they were before we all got to them.
Jung Ok, would you like to give a little bit of an insight in how it was after the South Korea forum?
First, because usually this concept, global, combined with the global, modern, and direct democracy, three different concepts will come together. So because of that, it was very difficult to organize that forum in the beginning period. So one thing I learned, so I know how much sweat were driven by Joe and Bruno in each preparatory process. So democracy cannot go smoothly. So it needs some people's political, moral, and wisdom and the will put together. So I learned all those kind of organized in San Sebastian and Montevideo, in Taichung, and if those kind of events make it happen, all those kind of endeavors should be put together. So we became easily a member of a community. So it is one thing, good thing. So like-minded people who really want a democratic society were together, and we thought we were not alone, and we were not alone. So that was encouraged us very to go further our journey. So sometimes this goes smoothly, but sometimes go directly back. But always we were together. We shared the difficulties of collecting the signatures, and once collecting the signature, but many hurdles are waiting for us, even in those kind of advanced country in Switzerland and the United States. So in that sense, I learned the democracy is closely related to global, and also it is in modern and post-modern, and further modern. We should make it modernized by ourselves, and should be more direct rather than whether we are always in complementary situation, but I think making more direct, so that I know I bear in mind those kind of mission, though it is not enough in our country context, but the target is there. So, and with like-minded people, so that was the greatest strength for me to go forward.
Thank you very much, Young Ok. And then finally, yes, let's go to Tunisia, where the forum took place at a very interesting time in 2015. Please, Mehdi, go ahead.
So it was a real interesting time because it was just few months after the 2014 elections, which was a very partisan elections with people in politics fighting against each other. And I think the global was a very important occasion to have them sit together and discuss about real problem and to show that to our students and to people in Tunisia that it's possible to have people sit and discuss about problems. It was also important to listen, share, and compare experience from other parts of the world. And for me, it was an important occasion to discover this beautiful community of direct international democracy and direct democracy.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you to all four of you, our wonderful speakers. Matt, thank you for that really insightful keynote, and thank you to Mehdi, Young Ok, and Joe for joining us from all corners of the world. Many of you have mentioned it, this is what we wanted to do with our second part of the event, is really put the spotlight on